Hi, and welcome back to the last segment of this Thursday edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk. I want to go right to the phones. We're kind of reacting to statements that Governor Perry made about states being the laboratory of democracy, about saying he's determined to protect the private property rights of ranchers on the border with Oklahoma. He makes no apologies for being a competitive governor. He wants to create a climate, a regulation, taxation, legal precedent that will be attractive to people from all over the country. He supports fracking. It is harmless. It's good for jobs. It stimulates the economy. New York could use it. They've got parts of their state that are turning into a third world country, in part because they don't allow fracking in the state of New York. And then his comments about immigration, which I thought were pretty squishy at best. And we just had a caller, Frederick, saying, look, he hadn't done a thing to secure the southern border. So that could be, as it was in 2012, that could wind up being Governor Perry's Achilles heel. You know, I think all the American people want from Governor Perry is to say very simply, I will enforce border laws. Whatever immigration laws are, I'm going to enforce them. That's all he's got to say, and then do it. Build a fence, seal up the border. Let's use E-Verify to make sure that everybody that wants a job is eligible because they are a legal resident. They are legally living in the United States, green card or whatever, but they've got the legal right to be here. That's all he's got to do, and he doesn't seem to be able to bring himself to the point where he can take a clear stand on that. Well, let's go back to the phones. Let's go to Cynthia in Palestine, Texas. Cynthia, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hi. Well, this is not why I called, but the Bushes have stopped pretty much putting that border fence up in the Texas.
Uh-huh.
And right now, see, you give them enough rope, they'll hang themselves. Under Obama administration, there are no jobs, so they are going home.
Yeah. Well, you know, and Rick Perry, it's interesting. Rick Perry was talking in one of those segments, hey, you know, we might see an outflow. We might see this whole immigration flow reverse because Mexico's getting ready to loosen their energy regulations, so people may be going back to Mexico because that's where the jobs might be.
Correct. And plus, you know, you can't say Rick Perry has not been deporting. He's been deporting the whole time.
He has?
But, yeah, he has. He has been deporting the best his ability.
Okay, so...
The Bushes have kept him from putting a fence up.
All right.
Let's get real.
All right, so Cynthia, your observation as somebody who lives in Texas, you believe that Governor Perry actually has applied himself to trying to defend that southern border. He has deported people. And
because the Bushes kind of put a stop to it. You know, they think they're elite. But he has deported. I'm telling you. He's had the most Border Patrol out there than anybody.
Now, I guess the question would be, how would the Bushes be able to stop him from building that fence? I don't understand that.
Well, I guess because they're elite. They just ran the show they're still running it.
Well, you know, but the thing is, Cynthia, he's the governor. I mean, George Bush is no longer the governor of Texas. I mean, Rick Perry's been the governor for the last 4 terms. So it seems to me that he would, unless the federal government is stopping him, which I could see that happening. If the federal government's stopping him, then, maybe Rick Perry's hands are tied. But I don't see how the Bushes could be stopping him from building that fence. So.
Well, look at this. They gave him enough rope. They're hanging themselves. They're going home.
Yeah.
But here's the deal. This Oklahoma Red River thing.
Yeah.
Oklahoma and Texas has no reason we've never had a problem with the river swaying. And a couple years back, it might have been 20 years ago, but they had a tug of war, Oklahoma and Texas tug of war.
Yeah.
And there was 10 times as many people showed up to tug that rope across that river than Oklahoma. Can you imagine what's going to show up now?
Yeah. Now, you're saying 10 times as many people showed up from Texas or showed up from Oklahoma?
Showed up from Tejas.
Showed up from, so they wanted to hang on to their property.
No, we wanted to do the tug of war. It was just a little game.
Oh, I see. It was just kind of for fun.
Right.
All right.
And
kind of
10 times showed up for the tug of war. Can you imagine what's fixing to show up for this?
Boy, if they actually come and try to take their land. All right, Cynthia. I appreciate that. Let us go to Patricia, South North Carolina. Patricia, welcome. What's on your mind?
Yes, Brian, please hear me out. I'm not a nut. I have a doctorate. I've been doing research for the last months. And all of this falls under the rubric of tyranny, what Obama is doing, both Bundy and what's going on in Texas.
Uh-huh.
And you mentioned the Bushes. What power do they have? The Bushes, all of them, If you'll remember in 1991, H.W. Bush wanted a new world order. Jeb Bush wants the Common Core curriculum. The various groups who support the New World Order don't want any borders between Mexico and the United States and Canada and the United States. They want us all to be one country. And they've used a lot of this land from Oakland, California to Atlanta, Georgia. There are the equivalent of concentration camps in order to put people there who will not agree with the New World Order. They've also bought 30,000 guillotines, and they are stored at Fort Lewis and Fort Bragg, and I believe it's Fort Hood.
I've heard that. That's something that just sounds.
It sounds
impossible to believe to me.
It sounds impossible, but take my word for it. It is true.
Well, see, but I can't, Patricia. I can't take your word for it. I've got to see some kind of documentation before I'm going to be able to accept that. Well, I may look into that, but I'm going to have to get some kind of documentation. And the same with the concentration camps. I haven't seen documentation on that. What I do know, I do agree with you that there's been a concerted effort to sort of increase the flow of traffic across our southern border and across the border with Canada to kind of loosen travel restrictions. We're allowing trucks from Mexico to transport, to deliver stuff well within the interior of the United States of America. So there has been a real concerted effort. I agree with you there to try to relax immigration flow between the countries, and I frankly think that is a mistake. And I know that President Bush, Bush too was all over that. He was a big time supporter of that kind of deal, and the corridor going from Mexico all the way up to Canada and all that. But Patricia, I'm going to have to be a little bit skeptical on the concentration camps and the guillotines. Willing to be convinced, but I'm going to have to see some pretty good documentation. All right, Patricia, thank you for the call. I appreciate that. Let's go to Tom, San Angelo, Texas. Tom, welcome. What's on your mind?
Yes, sir. I'm a land surveyor in Texas.
Yes, sir.
And there's some very specific rules and laws that have to do with rivers when they move, whether it be a very slow, imperceptible move, or whether it's a sudden change when a river changes course due to flooding.
Okay.
Now, when Texas joined the Union, the federal government did not take any of the land. They let Texas keep the land so we could pay off our own debts from our war with Mexico.
Okay.
So the federal government, unlike in Oklahoma, they have no basis for any land here in Texas. Unless they have a deed into the federal government, they have no claim.
Okay.
Now, typically in Texas, and I think most of the country, if the change in the river is slow, if it's erosion or even a slow silt deposits over a period of 50 years, and say the river moves 50 feet, the original upland owner maintains that ownership. He either loses the 50 feet, or if he's on the other side of the river, he gains the 50 feet. Now, if there's a flood or something that changes the course of the river by half a mile or a mile, the ownership does not change. You may end up owning land on the wrong side of the river all of a sudden, but the ownership along the river does not change, even if the course changes. So I'm not sure which way they're saying the river is moved, but there's 90,000 acres. If it moved to where it's in Texas, and it has been in Texas, the government's going to have no claim on it. Oklahoma's going to have some different rules, but I think they're all going to go along the same general term of the upland private property rights stay the same, and just because the river moves doesn't give the federal government a chance to come in and say that's their land now.
All right. Well, that's it, because I'm not exactly sure. I haven't seen pictures or visuals to kind of define or describe or illustrate the movement of the river. But I think this does have to do with the change in the course of the river. It has to do with the border being defined as, I think, the southern vegetation line below the Red River. As I understand, from what I remember reading, that's the official boundary, which means the official boundary actually could move, if I understand that correctly. But what you're saying, according to the rules of surveying, it doesn't actually change who owns the property. But I guess the question I would have, and I don't know if you have an answer for this, Tom, we just got about a minute left, but if the border is defined as the vegetation line on the south side of the river, say the Red River, and the river, the course of the river moves, and so that vegetation line kind of moves to the south, and there's some land that used to be, above that original boundary line, does that go to Oklahoma, or does that stay stay with Texas?
If the river moves south and the vegetation line slowly moves south, I would assume that would go in with Oklahoma, simply because a river is, to an extent, the living boundary. It changes.
Yeah. So what you're
And
saying
they
then
all
is, so what you're saying is if the land had moved toward Texas, then the federal government wouldn't have any possible way to approach this. But if the land is kind of migrating into Oklahoma, then they might have some power, or believe they have some kind of power of action to lay claim to that land.
Well, typically when you have riparian rights, your rights go to the bank of the river or however it's defined.
Mm-hmm.
And if that moves slowly, for instance, if over 20 years it moves 20 feet, the federal government doesn't get to come in there and claim that 20 feet. That 20 feet is going to belong to the person that originally had the riparian rights to the river to begin with.
Okay.
Otherwise, no one would ever have riparian rights because the river would change.
Yeah.
And they lose their money.
All right. Well, listen, I appreciate that, Tom. It's very informative. Thank you. Thank you for that. So anyway, basically, the state of Texas, from what I can tell, they're saying, look, the river's the boundary, and the fact that it may change course does not give any of this ground, any of this land to the federal government. Well, that's it for today. Peter, thanks for calling from Texas. We can grab Peter's number. Maybe we can get him on the program tomorrow, because I hate to appreciate your call, Peter. We'll try to see if we can get to you tomorrow. Here's a blessing for the rest of your day. Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think, according to the power at work within us, to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Bow low before God. Stand tall before man. Never forget, we are fighting a winnable war. See you tomorrow.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.